You know, when we think about space travel, we picture these incredible, heroic astronauts, these magnificent rockets piercing the sky. But behind all that glory is a problem nobody really wants to talk about. A problem that, here on Earth, is simple, but in zero gravity becomes an absolute engineering nightmare. We have to talk about going to the bathroom. Because in space, everything floats. Your food, your tools, and yep, your waste. So forget the romance of floating among the stars for a second. Let's get into the truly unglamorous, kind of absurd, but totally critical story of the zero-gravity toilet.
And look, this is not a theoretical problem. This is a real thing that happened. During the Apollo 10 mission, they're literally orbiting the moon, right? A moment that should be just pure majesty. It turns into, well, this. The actual mission transcript has an astronaut saying, "There's a turd floating through the air." And immediately you hear the other two crewmates go, "Wasn't me, I didn't do it." Can you just picture that? Three of the most highly trained pilots in human history, soaring over the moon, trying to solve the mystery of the rogue poop. This is the hilarious and tragic reality of sanitation in space.
So who are the people that have to solve these problems? Well, you can kind of think of them as modern-day gong farmers. Back in medieval England, these guys had the absolutely foul job of cleaning out septic pits. It was dangerous, a lot of them died from the fumes. Their modern counterparts? NASA's waste management engineers. The job is arguably even harder. Sure, they're in a lab, not a pit, but they're dealing with the same fundamental problem, except this time it floats. And figuring it out requires a top-level security clearance.
And the problem showed up on day one. Literally, America's very first crewed spaceflight. Alan Shepard was only supposed to be up there for 15 minutes. So, nobody even thought about a toilet. But then there were hours of launch delays. And he radios down to Mission Control. "Guys, I gotta go. I really have to pee." And Mission Control just panicked. They were terrified the urine would short-circuit the electronics in his suit. But Shepard couldn't hold it. And so, the very first American in space launched while sitting in a puddle of his own pee. He made history, sure, but he also became the first explorer to wet his pants on the job.
Okay, so after Shepard's soggy introduction to space, NASA knew they had to do something. And their early attempts were, to be honest, pretty primitive. For liquids, they came up with the maximum absorbency garment, which is just a fancy way of saying a diaper. But for solid waste, it got so much worse. They invented the fecal bag. Now just picture this. It's a plastic bag with a sticky adhesive rim that an astronaut had to, manually stick to their own body. In zero gravity, this wasn't just tricky, it was a recipe for absolute disaster.
And using that fecal bag was basically every astronaut's worst nightmare. I mean, the sheer horror of it is just perfectly captured by this one Gemini astronaut. He said he spent 45 agonizing minutes just trying to chase down a piece of waste that had escaped. And his conclusion just says it all. He learned that space isn't romantic, it's hell. This wasn't exploration, it was a high-tech, zero-gravity janitorial crisis. So by the 1970s, NASA finally had to admit that the whole plastic bag system was a complete failure. It was time to actually engineer a real toilet. And this kicked off the grueling and often pretty humiliating development of the first true space commode for the Skylab space station. But to build it, first, they needed test subjects.
And these were not your typical test pilots. No. Volunteers were paid to come into a lab, eat specific diets, we're talking beans, spicy foods, all the things designed to test the system's limits, and then, perform. And the engineers would watch them from behind a glass partition, taking notes. And when the system failed, which it did a lot, the engineers themselves had to put on hazmat suits and clean up the floating mess. It was so bad, one engineer later wrote that he could never eat chocolate ice cream again because it looked way too similar to a system failure. Just a brutal, brutal sacrifice for science.
So the final Skylab toilet had this tiny little opening, just 10 centimeters, about 4 inches wide. And to use it correctly, the astronauts had to go through toilet training. Seriously. They'd sit on a replica toilet on Earth that had a camera inside it, which would show their alignment on a monitor. Then an instructor would guide them. Okay, a little to the left? Perfect. And they had to memorize that exact position by muscle memory so they could replicate it in space. You can't make this stuff up, but it was absolutely necessary.
And this toilet, this amazing piece of engineering that required grown men to go back to potty training, cost $2.5 million back in the 70s. You know what that is in today's money? About $15 million. All of that for a device with a target the size of a teacup.
But even after all that training, all that money, disaster struck. Of course it did. In 1973, on the Skylab 3 mission, the toilet's vacuum system failed and basically backfired.
A literal fecal explosion event shot waste particles all through the station. So you've got this three-man crew of brilliant scientists and pilots who had to spend 2 hours acting as janitors, cleaning up the mess while they orbited the Earth.
Okay, so let's fast forward to today, to the International Space Station. Surely, after decades of experience and all our technological advances, we finally perfected the space toilet, right? Well, not exactly. It is still a million-dollar problem. So the ISS basically has two main toilet systems. The American one, the Universal Waste Management System, cost a staggering $23 million. For contrast, the Russian system is simpler, it's noisier, but it's way more reliable, and it costs just a fraction of the American one. It really goes to show you, sometimes simpler is just better.
And even these multi-million-dollar toilets are not foolproof. Get this. In an almost unbelievable coincidence, in 2019, all of the toilets on the ISS broke down at the same time. And what was the crew's only option? They had to go back to the 1960s method, absorbent pads and plastic bags. 60 years of progress, just totally undone by a really bad day for plumbing. The whole incident led to a now famous tweet from one of the astronauts on board. They basically reminded everyone that, yeah, the view is incredible, but the reality can be a little less glamorous. They pleaded with the public to stop romanticizing space because in that moment, they were literally peeing into garbage bags. And that tweet went viral. It was this rare, unfiltered glimpse into the real, messy challenges of living in orbit.
And this is really where the story turns from this sort of tragicomedy into a really serious challenge for our future. I mean, this isn't just about embarrassing stories anymore. It's about the incredible sacrifices of these unsung heroes and the huge problems we still have to solve before we can even think about going to Mars and beyond.
I mean, think about it. A 3-year mission to Mars? A broken toilet isn't just an inconvenience there, it's a mission-ending catastrophe. So engineers are now working on these amazing closed-loop systems that can recycle almost all the water from urine and even convert solid waste into fuel. NASA is so serious about this that back in 2020, they actually launched the Lunar Loo Challenge, offering cash prizes to anyone in the public who could design a better toilet.
But the cost of all this work, it's not just financial. It's deeply personal. One engineer shared that his job, as vital as it is, has made his social life impossible. He says that when he tells people he designed space toilets, the conversation just ends. His career, the one that's helping humans explore space, has, in his words, sentenced him to loneliness.
And this sense of sacrifice was just perfectly summed up by a guy named Donald Henderson at his retirement party. After 30 years designing these systems, he admitted that while his friends got to design rockets, his entire career was spent dealing with, well, the other end of the process. He told everyone, "My work isn't sexy, but it's critical." And he was absolutely right. Without him and people like him, there would be no space program, period.
So the next time you look up at the stars and you dream about exploring the cosmos, just take a second to remember the invisible heroes. The engineers, the test volunteers, these modern-day gong farmers who sacrifice their comfort, their social lives, and for one guy, even his ability to enjoy chocolate ice cream. Their work isn't glamorous, not at all, but it is the absolute foundation that all of our grandest achievements are built on. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? In every great human endeavor, who are the other invisible heroes we never get to see?